Alrighty guys, welcome back to another coding video. Today I have kind of a cool project for you guys. So I was able to code Super Tic-Tac-Toe. Now I have made a regular Tic-Tac-Toe in the past, however, Super Tic-Tac-Toe is a bit of a greater challenge and I wanted to tackle that. One, just to test my skills as a programmer, but also because I wanted to create this game so I could play it in class with my friends. So I'll just go ahead and show it off right here, and then after that I'll dive into how the code works. So, I've got the basic setup here, title, instructions on how to play. You can read that and pause the video now if you like. It also has this nice little indicator, who's next. And so I know how the instructions work, and this will explain it if you don't know. So I'll just go ahead and kind of show you. So I'll have the first person go here. Now the yellow squares indicate where you're allowed to play next. And so to give a brief rundown, if you don't understand these rules, because I played in this upper left corner, that means that the next person has to play in the upper left section. So O would have to go into this section. They couldn't go anywhere over here. And so let's say O is like, well, I want to take a corner as well. Well, since they took the bottom right corner, now X has to go in the bottom right section. So X would say, okay, maybe go here. Then O could go up here. X could go here. Now you can see we're only allowed to play in the yellow one, so you can't overwrite any of the previous spots. And so, you can just kind of keep going. And then we'll say, like, just kind of fill in some blocks randomly here. Now let's say that we wanted to win a box here. So let's have X win this box up here. So X gets 3s in a row, and that takes this box completely. And so now you can't go in any of these squares anymore. So it's O's turn, and because X went in the left middle quadrant, the left middle section here is where O has to go. So if O were to go up in this upper corner, notice how there's no yellow squares. And that's because this section has already been claimed, or it's full. If it was a tie, that would also still be considered claimed. X is now allowed to go in any space they want, and so X would probably want to take this. And then that was also the upper left corner, so now O can go anywhere they want. And of course, the natural move there would be block X from winning, which, as you can see, that also leaves X with an opportunity to go anywhere. So we can just kind of keep going with the game here, and I'll show you what happens when we finish it. In fact, I'll kind of try and finish this as fast as possible. We'll see if we can get O here to win. Or not O. O. We'll see if we can get X to win. There we go. So X got 3 of these sections in a row diagonally here. And so we see that X wins, and there's a play again button. And then we get this neat little game ID, which basically just tells you the order of the moves. So you can see my first move was the top left section and the top left subsection of that. And then the next move was the bottom right subsection of that top left section. And so it just kind of goes there, and then you can copy it with this button by clicking that. And then when you play again, it just basically reloads the page and gives you a fresh start. So now that you've seen it in action, let's go into the code and see how I made it. Okay, so here we are in the code. It's basically just a basic HTML document with some CSS embedded in, and then some JavaScript towards the end. And the JavaScript's really where we're going to be focusing today, but I'll go through all of it just so you can get an idea. So first we have the styles here, and this basically just gives the setup for how things are ordered and how things will become responsive if the page shrinks, and the styling of everything, which it's all pretty basic. There's not a whole lot to it, but it is there if you want to see all that. And so here's the HTML here. We have the 2 sections. The left section is mainly just the instructions written out there, and then some of the buttons and things. And then here is the actual board itself. And the way I did this is I created a div, and inside that was a big table. And you can see that that stretches all the way throughout the entire document, basically. And in that table, there are 3 rows, and each row has 3 columns. And in each column is another table, and those are the subsections. And in each of those sections is 3 more rows with 3 more columns. And those are the individual boxes that you can claim. And so you can see that each box has a class of top left, or top middle, or top right that gives it the border properties that it needs. And then on click, it's going to run the same function passing in 2 parameters, allowing us to utilize the functionality of JavaScript to tell which box specifically has been clicked. the first parameter is which section it is, which of the 9 main sections, and the second one is the subsection. And then we also have an ID with the corresponding section and subsection for each one as well. So you can see we get all the top, middle, and bottom things. So now here we are in this JavaScript, and we have 81 different variables getting us all the information, the entire object as a variable of all 81 individual boxes. Then we arrange those in 9 arrays that are just the main sections, and then we add those 9 arrays to a variable just called all. And so we can basically use these arrays within arrays for for loops to be able to loop through everything. Then we have some other variables here that will come in handy later, and then we have some other arrays here that basically give us some control over which boxes are allowed to be clicked at any given time, so that you don't have people overwriting previous actions or going into illegal moves. So here's the function that I mentioned earlier. When you click a box, this is what gets run. So you see it takes the quadrant and subquadrant, and it registers that as square. So that lets the program know which square specifically was clicked. And it says if that square is in the allowed array, and currently the allowed array starts with everything in it, and in the currently allowed array, which also starts with everything in it, then you're going to actually do this. Otherwise, you're going to just ignore the click, because if it's not allowed, you shouldn't be allowed to click that box. So it checks to make sure you're allowed to click that box. And then here's some stuff that I will go over later, but I'm going to simplify it right now to just say when you have those yellow, the yellow highlighted squares, those highlights will stay there unless you specify that those highlights need removed. And so this is just the code that says, hey, remove any of those old highlights. But I will go through this more in depth later. And so then here is where we actually add the letter X or O, which is the current player variable, to that box. And then we say, okay, well, if the current player was X, then we're going to switch it to O and highlight that box. But if the current player was O, then we're going to change it to X and highlight it with O. And then you're going to switch that indicator on the left from X to O or O to X. Then the taken array that registers which squares have been taken is going to get the square added to it so that you can remember which squares have already been taken. And then that code that's at the end of the game, that is a separate array, so that's going to take them separately. And then finally, this little bit of code here is used to remove that square that we just took from the allowed array. And it's an if statement mixed with an indexing thing. So what we do, you can't just take an array and say remove this specific item without leaving like a hole in the array or something. And so the simplest way, in my opinion, to get that item out of the array is to take the index of it from where it is and then make sure that index is greater than or equal to 0, because if you don't have that item in the array, then what's going to happen is it's going to return a -1, and that's going to mess with your array. And then you're going to splice it, which means take out a section of the array. But instead of a section, we're just going to say take it out from that index and just one item. So it's going to remove it from the array. But to do that, you need these lines here. And so then, after they've actually done that action, what the program is going to do is it's going to analyze the board to see who's made any matches or 3 in a row. So it runs this next function called analyze. And once again, we pass the subquadrant because we're going to need that to determine what is the next section that the next player is allowed to use. So we're on to the analyze section. Here we have all of these things again, but instead we've added a V on the end, and over here we've added .inner.html. So this gives us, the V means value, so this gives us the value of what's in those boxes. So it'll give us an X or an O rather than the entire object. And then once again we add those two arrays and then an array for all of them. Now here we have our first for loop, and this one just goes through all of the main sections here and says, okay, check for each main section if there are any, or if of all the subsections, if there are any 3 in a row. And so there's going to be 8 ways you can get 3 in a row. There's the top row, middle row, bottom row, left column, middle column, right column, and then the 2 crosses. And so there's 8 if statements here saying if those things are all the same and they're not blank, because you don't want to say someone has a 3 in a row for having blanks, then you're going to run this function and this function here, and you're going to update the owner's array. And so I will run through how those functions work later, but basically this one claims that block as that person's, this one blocks the empty squares from being acceptable, and the owner's array just registers who owns which full sections. Now, Down here we have this other one that's determining if any of those are ties. And so if all 9 of the squares are not blank, meaning that they've all been taken, but none of these other things came true, which means no one won, then you're going to say we want to tie that square. And so that's another function that I'll go through in a minute. And then finally, once you've analyzed all 9 individual subsections, we have to analyze the 3 inner rows of the big sections. And so that's where this owners comes into play. So we're checking who owns them, and the same way as before, we have those 8 if statements, and once again, if they're all ties. And so there's a 0 index in JavaScript, which means that the first item in your array does not have an index of 1, it has an index of 0. And so when we have 9 squares, there's 0 through 8. And so if you tie one of those squares, you pass that number in. So you would tie 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 8 or whatever. But if you tie the entire board, it's going to send 9 through there, and that will come important later. And so once it's determined what's happening on the board, it's going to set the currently allowed values to blank because it's going to change those here in the future, but we want to get rid of the previous ones. And then say we do want to remove the yellow highlights as far as we know. Now this is where things get a little bit complicated because this is where we have to determine what squares are allowed to be clicked next. So this is where we use that subquadrant variable, and we're saying, okay, figure out using these 9 if statements which subquadrant they used. And like, for example, if it's the top left, then the currently allowed is going to be equal to the top left. And it also checks here to make sure that there's actually allowed spaces to be doing that, meaning that no one owns that square. So we're saying, okay, first of all, check which subquadrant the previous person played in, and we're going to say, well, has that section been filled up? And if it hasn't been filled up, which means it's equal to 0, 0 dictates that it is still available. If that value was X or O, that would be taken, and if it was a 1, then that would mean that that section has been tied. So if it's still open, then you're going to say the currently allowed spots to be taken are only that main section. So it goes through and checks that for all 9 areas, and then we get this section here. So if the currently allowed was equal to everything, meaning that the person chose an area that was filled so that the next person is allowed to play anywhere they want, then we're going to say remove highlights as false. And the reason for that is because we don't want any white pieces, or we don't want any white or blue or red pieces to be unhighlighted. And so we're going to say there's not going to be any yellow boxes, so you don't have to worry about removing the highlights. And that will come in handy back at the beginning when I showed you that we were resetting all the highlights. So, and it says otherwise, what we're going to have here is we're going to do this loop that I showed you at the beginning. And the way this works is it's a for loop, but it has a twist to it. So we have this for loop saying go through all of the currently allowed things and make sure that none of them are taken. Because if they are taken, we don't want to color them yellow. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove them using that splice method. And then it's going to say, okay, now take everything in the currently allowed and highlight it yellow. Now, you might notice here that my for loops are set up a little bit different. We have this section and this section. And you can see they're similar, but there are some key differences. Now, there's an interesting reason for this, and this was probably the trickiest bug I encountered during this project. And so I kind of wanted to go through and explain what happened. So I was running into a bug where certain squares would be overwritten with yellow highlights, and I was confused as to why this was happening. So I started debugging it step by step, and I was going through, and I watched as it checked, does the taken variable include what is in currently allowed? And I would logically say yes, currently allowed has 9 objects because there's 9 currently allowed places. And taken has just a bunch, right? Like there's a bunch of squares that have been taken. And I would watch it and I would say, okay, let's go through one by one and say how many of these are in taken. And the problem was that it would just skip over some, and I was not understanding why. I was going, it would go through the first one and say that's not in taken, so you don't need to worry about it. Then it would hit the second one and it would say, okay, that one is taken, so we're going to delete it, and it would delete it successfully. And then it would go to the third one, and I would say that one's also been taken, so you need to delete it, and it would say, nope, that's not in here. And I was very confused, and it finally clicked with me that what we're doing is we're setting I equal to 0 and having it increment upwards, which means that every single time it goes through this loop, I is going to increment upwards. But if we delete an object from the array, then the indexes of the array all get shifted, which means we essentially skip an item each time. And so that was messing up everything. But I realized that if you do it in reverse order, so start with I at the biggest number, subtract 1 each time, and wait until it hits 0, then what's going to happen is it's going to knock items off the end, which is not going to shift the lesser numbers. And so that's just an interesting thing I learned throughout this project. So hopefully that helps anyone working on a similar project. I hope that made sense. It's a little confusing to explain, but hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. So then here we have some of the simpler functions that I mentioned earlier. This one is claim, which basically just gets the player and then highlights the selected box with that player's color. Here's block, which is a similar for loop to what we used before, and just goes through and removes all the blocks from allowed. And then here is the win function and the tie function, which are kind of similar. So the win function just goes through and makes sure that we remove all the yellow highlights, just like we do elsewhere in the program. And then it just updates everything on the left side and prints it to the screen. And then we have this key part here where we set allowed equal to blank. And that just means we lock the board so that nothing can shift after someone's won the game. Now our tie one has basically the same thing. If box equals 9, then what's going to happen, like I mentioned earlier, is that the full game is a tie. So it basically just gives you the exact thing but says everything ties. But if box is not equal to 9, and that means that someone's just tied one box, and that's just going to set the owner of that box to 1. So not X or O, because neither person won it, it's a tie, so it just goes from 0 to 1. And then, of course, we had that code, which here's just the simple function to copy the code, and then here's the simple function to replay the game, which actually just reloads the page. So that's all the code. It was almost 900 lines of code, which is pretty awesome. It's one of the bigger projects I've worked on, honestly, but it was a ton of fun to work on. I had so much fun making this and figuring out all the bugs, and honestly, this project went a lot smoother than I really expected, so I just love sharing it. And of course, I will leave a link in the description to a Google Drive folder that has actually all of my coding projects I've made and all the ones that you'll see on my YouTube channel, so you can download them and try them for yourself, or you can modify them and make whatever you like. So, you know, check that out. Definitely try it out for yourself. See what you can do. And thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.